Hey guys, Daniel Alexander here. So this is just some documentation I did of sort of some garden projects in my backyard in Fayetteville this past spring 2017. And so I thought I would just compile all the footage that I gathered and maybe share the things that I learned, and maybe some people will get something out of it, but if nothing else, I will get something out of it, and because I will have the documentation of what all I did. So this is a technique called sheet mulching, and it's basically where you lay out paper or cardboard or any organic material, and you use it to snuff out the grass or the weeds underneath. And it's a great way, if you don't want to till the soil, to kind of have a fresh start for your new garden soil or compost that you end up putting on top of the sheet mulching. So it is a good idea to get your paper or cardboard wet. That'll just help it decompose faster. And really in just a few weeks, it should decompose enough for the plant's roots to kind of poke through and get to the actual ground level soil. So there's a wild chive, or onion grass as I called it growing up, that grows locally in Fayetteville, and it's a very hardy plant, and it was coming up around the time of year that I was starting the garden, and so I figured I would transplant some that were growing in the middle of the yard to along the edge of the garden, just as a nice edging. But also I've heard that growing onion or garlics along the edge of a garden can deter certain pests. So my intention with this project was to spend as little money as possible, and also to use any free and local resources that I could. At first, I thought I was just going to buy a couple bags of garden soil from the store, but then I found out that Fayetteville has a composting facility, and that you can get compost in bulk by the truckload, and it's very affordable. It's $20 for a truckload, which ends up being about 2 cubic yards. The downfall with the city's compost is that you don't know where it's coming from. It can come from a wide variety of organic sources, and it also did seem to have quite a few grass seeds and other seeds in the compost. And at the site, the compost pile is just out in the open, so it makes sense that grass seeds and other things would blow in onto the pile. For my low tunnel, I just used some bamboo I got in the area, and I would actually recommend using some kind of PVC, because the bamboo tended to poke holes in the tarps and let out a lot of my moisture. The tarps were a pack of 2, and they cost $15. I put a lot of leaves and mulch around the edge of the tarps to really lock in the moisture and also lock in the warmth. It did get drier than I expected underneath the tarps, so something to learn for next time is that I do need to water more than I did. I think ideally I would do a drip irrigation system, but that was just more money than I wanted to spend. So I also built a garden bed on the west side of the yard, and I just moved mulch over there, and I actually happened to find some compost that someone had thrown out in this sort of back alleyway behind our yards, and so I used that, moved it over there, and made a couple garden beds that you'll see pictures of later on. Here I expanded the garden bed a little bit, did more sheet mulching, and I laid out some compost for my melon mound. This is a mound of compost where I planted a bunch of different squash and melon seeds into there, and I put some trash bags full of leaves around it that were black trash bags, and these were bags that the city would not pick up, and they sat for about a week or two, and so I thought I would do them a favor and just take them off the person's hand and put them around my squash mound. And so here's the tarp that I put over it. I thought this method worked really well, and the bags helped to capture and hold heat under the tarp, and so got a really good early start on all the melons and squash. So this is the sort of zone 1 herb garden that I built next to the house, and I just kind of covered a bunch of organic mulch with the city's compost, and that seemed to work pretty well. And I also added a trellis for some peas and beans to climb. For the trellis, I just used some metal conduit that I bent and some plastic meshing that I attached to the conduit, and it was a really cheap method for making a nice tall trellis. This is another little garden bed that I built along the back fence, and this was again sheet. and then I added the compost onto the sheet mulching. I had some extra compost, and so I added it to this big pile of mulch next to the house to grow a few extra things. I ended up planting some pepper plants into this mound, and this mound, as you'll see in later pictures, grew quite a bit after I started the patio project. So as you can see, I've used a lot of leaves, a lot of mulch, and all of it was free, from the city. Everyone is bagging them up for me, doing all the work for me, and I just, reap the benefits of this great material that composts and turns into great soil eventually. So that really is a great example of where one man's trash is another man's treasure. So everything grew pretty nicely. Like I said earlier, I did have some grass seeds popping up, but I really don't mind weeds in with my garden bed. I think it adds more green, and in the end, it can help to kind of lock the moisture into the ground, and it also creates more diversity, which can be a good thing because I'm not spraying for pests or anything like that. And this is just to have a little extra greens in our diet. Here are some pictures, some close-up shots of the beds I made on the west side of the house, and there's some kale growing in there, and I think some mustard greens right there. So now you'll see some pictures of the patio project that I did in the backyard, and the idea here again was to spend as little money as possible and to just kind of use the earth material that I could dig off-site in the backyard. And so first I had to remove the sod. I tossed the sod over on top of the mulch mound to the right, and so that built up the mound and got the decomposition going over there. And then I just raked smooth and tamped down the earth and clay for the patio. And then I added my Portland cement and raked it in and got it wet and tamped that down to really get that hard layer. Now, I did a lot of kind of practicing because really I used way more Portland cement than I needed to. I still only bought 4 bags on the whole project. It was only 4 bags, which was $40. And so after tamping it down, my level for the patio was way too low and I had to end up adding a lot more clay. And so it was kind of like a sort of wasted layer. I could have just added all the clay I needed at first and then started adding Portland cement on top. But either way, it was good experimentation. I learned a lot. So you can see I did quite a bit of digging and earth moving, and that's really where your expense is. It's a physical labor, manual labor expense. I also experimented by adding dry grass clippings to my mixture, and this is what you would do when making cob. And it can add a little bit of tensile strength as well as help to release the moisture from the material and prevent cracking. I don't think it is totally necessary, but I do think it had a beneficial effect in the project. So once I had tamped everything down and got the patio to the right height and the right slope angle, I started doing smoother layers of the earth and concrete. And I did this by making a liquid slurry or slip of the clay material and then adding a certain proportion of the Portland cement. The proportion was roughly 1-to-5 ratio of Portland cement to my liquid earthen slurry. For the final layers, I really had to make sure I screened out all of the rocks from the earthen material before I added my Portland cement, and that made for really smooth layers. It was also good to kind of let it dry a good deal in between layers so I could see if it was cracking, and then I could also fill the cracks with the next layer. And I think that was key to kind of do several finishing layers of the more smooth liquid earth and cement. After the patio dried, I added a top layer of an all-purpose water sealer just to give it a little bit of extra waterproofing. So this is the final product, and of course a cheap patio needs a cheap table and a cheap umbrella. So I definitely learned a lot from this project, and I think if I did it again I could make it even better with probably half the materials. I didn't even use all 4 bags of Portland cement, so I think if I did it again I could probably do it with less than 2 bags. So here are just some final shots of the garden I took before I was leaving town, and I do have family in Fayetteville that will enjoy the garden even when I am gone. So I definitely learned a lot and gained a lot of great experience working on these projects. And I hope that you guys learned something from watching this video, and I encourage all of you to go build your own gardens, right? It's a great thing to grow your own food, and it's really a beautiful thing to kind of connect with that nourishment, right? To know where your food comes from. So go build a garden, and until next time, peace.